The divorce papers felt lighter than they should have. That's the strange thing nobody warns you about. 7 years of your life, condensed into 16 pages, and you'd barely know it from the weight in your hands. I stood at the top of the steps outside Osgood Hall. The June wind cutting across Queen Street, in a way that's specific to that particular stretch of downtown Toronto, cold even in summer if you're standing still long enough. I held the papers with both hands so they wouldn't blow away, and I read my own name one more time. Naomi Delaney, née Hartwell. In 48 hours, I would be Naomi Hartwell again, but right now I was still hers, still the woman who had begged her father 7 years ago to give Curtis Delaney a chance. Still the woman who had stood in Kenneth Hartwell's study, surrounded by dark oak shelving, and 30 years of framed milestones from building Hartwell Care Partners out of a single retirement home in Mississauga into a network of 12 long-term care facilities across Ontario, and cried, real tears, the embarrassing kind, swearing that Curtis was different, that he was driven and kind, and just needed the right platform to prove it. My father had looked at me the way only a man who has already lost his wife looks at his only child, with a helplessness so large it doesn't know what to do with itself. He'd pressed his lips together. He'd nodded. He had let Curtis through the door without conditions, without a prenuptial agreement, without a single demand beyond the silent one that Curtis prove him wrong for worrying. Curtis had not proven him wrong. The sound of shoes on the stone steps pulled me back. Curtis emerged from the courthouse, and I turned without meaning to. He looked immaculate. That was always the thing about him. The surface was always perfect. Navy suit, the one I had picked out at Holt Renfrew for his 41st birthday. Hair freshly cut, and beside him, her arm threaded through his, as casually as if they were heading somewhere pleasant, was Leanne. 28 years old, a facilities coordinator from our Oakville location. She was wearing a yellow dress and carrying a bag I recognized from a credit account statement 3 months ago. I had said nothing. I had been saying nothing for a very long time. Well, Curtis stopped at the bottom of the steps, shielding his eyes from the sun. He almost smiled. That's done. We can both move on now. Leanne tilted her head with the kind of sympathy that is actually satisfaction wearing a very thin disguise. Naomi, don't take this so hard. Some people just aren't right for each other. You're right, I said. Some people aren't. Curtis's expression shifted. He lowered his voice, though not enough. Before you go making any moves at the company, think carefully. I've been running operations for 4 years. The regional managers report to me. My mother has built solid relationships in procurement, billing, HR. You walk back in there thinking you can just undo things, and you will find the ground has shifted under you. The roots go deep, Naomi. Deeper than you understand. I put the papers in my bag, walked down the remaining steps, and crossed Queen Street without looking back. My car was parked off University Avenue. I sat in it for a long time before I turned the key. I scrolled through 7 years of photographs on my phone. The wedding in Muskoka, the road trip to the Cabot Trail, Curtis, laughing in our kitchen on a Sunday morning, a laugh that had always looked so genuine that I'd never been sure which version of him it belonged to. I selected all of it. I pressed delete. The system asked me if I was certain. I pressed confirm. Then I opened my contacts and scrolled to Dad. We had spoken perhaps twice a month for the past 2 years. He'd tried, at first, patient calls I'd kept short because of some obligation tied to Curtis or Gloria that made honest conversation with my father feel like a small betrayal of the household I was protecting. The household I had been slowly hollowed out of without ever once noticing the excavation. He picked up on the second ring. Naomi, just that, my name in his voice. I was completely undone. I don't know exactly how long I sat there crying. Long enough that the traffic on University thinned out and the city settled into its mid-morning rhythm. My father didn't rush me. He made the occasional sound, I'm here, I hear you, go on, and I told him everything. Not just the affair, though that had been months of accumulating evidence before I admitted it to myself. I told him about Gloria, about the ghost contractors connected to a numbered company registered at her Brampton address, about Curtis's brother Derek in procurement approving supply orders from vendors charging Hartwell Care nearly 40% above the Ontario provincial average. The overcharge cycling back to accounts the company's forensic accountant had spent months tracing. About Curtis's sister Wanda in billing, approving those same invoices without question. about the 7 relatives Gloria had installed across 3 facilities in less than 3 years. When I finished, my father was quiet. Then his voice changed. I had heard that particular voice before, not often, but I knew it instantly. It was the voice that didn't ask permission from anyone. "I've had a forensic firm working on this for 14 months, he said. "I was waiting for you. I didn't want you caught between loving him and knowing what I knew. I thought if I forced the issue, you'd defend him and I'd lose you entirely. But the documentation is complete. The legal team has been ready since March." He had known. He had gathered the evidence, prepared the case, and waited in silence for me to find my way back on my own. An overwhelming mixture of gratitude and shame moved through me, the kind of feeling that has no word that fits it properly. I sat up straight, looked at the building across the street, ordinary and glass and unhelpful. My voice came back steadier than I expected. "I'll be at the office at 1:30, I said. "Have Sasha and Bruno ready." "Already done," he said. The Hartwell Care Partners head office occupied the 9th and 10th floors of a building on King Street West. I had grown up visiting this office. I had done homework in the boardroom on weeknights when my parents worked late, and there was nowhere else for me to be. I knew which elevator ran slow and which didn't. I knew the coffee machine on 9 was better than the one on 10. I knew which administrative assistants had been with the company since before I was born. I pressed my access card to the lobby reader. The light turned green. Sasha met me at the elevator. 22 years with Hartwell Care, hired by my father when the company had 3 facilities. She was the kind of person who remembered the names of your childhood pets and still somehow maintained every HR file in the organization with forensics precision. She didn't make a speech. She just looked at me steadily, in the way that people do when they want you to know they are on your side, without turning it into a moment. "Everything is in place," she said. Curtis's credentials and keycard access were deactivated at noon. Same for Derek, Wanda, and the others on the list. Reg Delaney's vendor accounts have been flagged with the bank. Legal has the full package. My father was waiting in the boardroom. He stood when I came in, and we looked at each other for a moment without speaking. He seemed smaller than I remembered, the way people seem smaller after a long absence. Thinner hands, grayer hair, the careful way he held himself that told me his knee had gotten worse. He reached out and squeezed my arm briefly, and that was enough. "Let's finish this," he said. Gloria was holding court in the boardroom. She had taken the chair at the head of the table, my father's chair, the one with the custom back adjustment he'd requested for his spine. She wore a blazer with gold buttons and a confident expression, flanked by Derek on her left and Wanda on her right, with 3 facility managers who had been installed over the past 2 years filling the remaining seats. She looked, in a word, settled, like someone who had decided the property had already changed hands. She looked up when I pushed the door open, and her expression cycled through surprise, contempt, and something almost amused. "Naomi," she set her coffee down, "this is a senior operations meeting, I don't think." "Sit down, Gloria." I walked to the end of the table and set my folder on the glass surface. "I won't take long. When Curtis and I married, you became family. I welcomed that. I approved Derek's appointment to procurement when 3 other candidates were more qualified on paper. I signed off on Wanda's transition into the billing coordinator role, despite concerns that had been flagged in her previous review. I extended your family a level of trust that I am not going to pretend in this room was wise. I opened the folder and slid the first document down the table. This is a materials supply contract for our Barrie facility, authorized by Derek. The supplier is Northern Comfort Health Supplies, a numbered company registered in February 2022 at 14 Parkway Crescent, Brampton, which is your home address. Billing rates for disposable medical supplies run approximately 38% above the Ontario provincial procurement benchmark. Excess payments over 14 months total $340,000. Transferred to the numbered company account. The room had gone completely still. Derek's face had drained. I slid the second document. This is a billing approval summary from Wanda's account, January 2023 to April 2026. 5 vendors. 4 of them incorporated within a 6-month window, none with employees on record with the CRA, none with a physical business address verifiable in any provincial registry. Total payments approved, $1.2 million. Wanda pushed back from the table. That is completely out of. Sasha. Sasha stepped forward from the doorway and read from the directive my father had signed that morning. The immediate suspension, with investigation pending of Curtis Delaney, Derek Delaney, Wanda Delaney, and 4 other associated employees. Termination with cause letters would follow after legal consultation, as required under the Ontario Employment Standards Act. All system access had been revoked. All flagged vendor accounts had been frozen pending forensic audit. Gloria stood up hard enough that her chair left a mark on the floor. Her voice went high and shaking, and everything she'd performed over 7 years, the warmth, the deference, the careful humility of a woman who understood the room she was in, collapsed entirely. "You ungrateful little," she pointed across the table at me. "Everything my son sacrificed for this company, his years, his expertise, and the moment things get difficult in a marriage, you throw all of it away." "Your son used this company as a personal account," I said. "That is not a marriage difficulty. That is fraud, Bruno." Bruno and his team were polite about it. They offered to assist with personal items. They explained, without any particular emphasis, that building access would not be available after today. One of Derek's colleagues tried to argue the point. Bruno simply waited for the argument to end, which it eventually did. Within 20 minutes, the boardroom was empty. My father stood beside me in the quiet. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. 3 days later, Curtis texted asking to meet. I had been half expecting it. People who have operated, through charm, their entire lives rarely accept the first door closing as permanent. We met at a cafe on Queen West. Curtis arrived looking like a man who had slept badly for several days in succession, which I suspected he had. The navy suit again, but something in it had gone wrong. The presentation he'd always maintained so effortlessly had finally slipped. Seeing him like that, I waited to feel something. Pity, or residual love, or the particular ache of recognizing someone you used to know. I felt none of it. Which was, I realized, its own kind of answer about how long I had really been gone from this marriage. He sat across from me. He didn't order anything. "I was wrong," he said. "Leanne was nothing. I know I destroyed something real." "Curtis." I slid an envelope across the table. Formal notice of civil action, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraudulent misrepresentation. The RCMP Financial Crimes Unit has also received the full documentation package. That's a separate matter filed by the company, not by me. His face had gone the color of the wall behind him. "You can't." "Hire a good lawyer," I said, "not the one Gloria uses." I took my coat and my coffee and left him sitting there alone. Outside, the Queen streetcar rattled past. The city moved around me, enormous and indifferent, doing its enormous city business. I breathed out for what felt like the first time in weeks. It was on a Thursday morning that Gloria made her last move. My father's house was in Oakville, a modest place relative to what he could have afforded, because Kenneth Hartwell had always been more interested in building something durable than in proving he'd built it. He'd lived there 23 years, since before my mother died. The garden was originally hers. He maintained it exactly as she had left it. I was having coffee with him at the kitchen table when the security camera notification came through. Gloria had brought Zoe. Zoe was 12 years old. She was Curtis's daughter from his first marriage. Pamela had moved to Hamilton after their divorce, and Zoe had spent weekends with Curtis and me during our marriage. I had sat in the bleachers at her swim meets in Burlington. I had helped her with a science fair project on water filtration. At some point I had, without really deciding to, genuinely loved this child. The way you love someone else's child when you believe the arrangement is permanent. On the security monitor, I could see her standing at the end of my father's driveway in the June heat, holding a piece of cardboard. Gloria stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder. The sign read, "Please forgive my dad. Please help our family." Even from the camera, I could see that Zoe had been crying. My father set his mug down very carefully, opened the gate. He walked out himself, without his cane. That told me everything about the quality of his anger. By the time I caught up, he was already at the gate. Gloria launched into it immediately. Her family had been destroyed. Curtis had been set up. Naomi was using the company to wage a personal vendetta against innocent people who had given years of their lives. My father did not look at Gloria. He crouched down, at considerable cost to his knee, and looked at Zoe directly. "How are you doing?" he asked. Zoe's chin wobbled. "Grandma Gloria said if we came here." "You don't have to explain anything," he said. "Nothing the adults around you have done is your responsibility. Not one thing. Zoe looked down at the sign in her hands. Something moved across her face, recognition or revulsion, or some combination of the two that had no exact name. She folded the cardboard in half. She set it on the ground. I want to call my mom. Her voice broke on the last word. Gloria reached for her arm. Zoe, we are not. I want to call my mom. Louder this time, with an authority that had nothing to do with volume, and everything to do with the fact that she had simply had enough. She looked at me, and there was something so direct in it that it cut straight through me. Can someone please call my mom? I already had my phone out. Pamela picked up on the first ring. I told her where we were and that Zoe was safe. I told her to come when she could. She said she was leaving Hamilton right now. I took Zoe inside. I made her water and sat with her at the kitchen table and didn't require anything of her. Not conversation, not explanation, not reassurance that she was fine. She was not fine. She didn't need to pretend. My father remained at the gate, and his quiet presence there was its own form of refusal that needed no supporting argument. Gloria's relatives arrived in a second car, not long after. Curtis's Uncle Morris and two of his aunts who had held advisory contracts through the facilities network, all now terminated. They tried to confront my father about severance. He told them, accurately, that the company's legal obligations under provincial law would be met for individuals not implicated in fraudulent activity, and that those who were implicated would be hearing from investigators rather than from HR. The relatives left. Pamela arrived in just under 40 minutes. She came through the gate without a word to Gloria, walked directly into the kitchen, and put her arms around her daughter. Zoe held on, and cried the way children cry when they've been trying not to for too long. Pamela looked at me over Zoe's head. Thank you, she said. She should never have been brought here, I said. I'm sorry it happened. After they left, I stood in the front garden and watched Gloria's car reverse out of the driveway. The engine sound faded down the street. The neighbors who had gathered dispersed. The June afternoon settled back into itself. My father came to stand beside me. The garden was doing what it does in June in Oakville. Peonies blown wide open, lavender just starting, the air carrying a green freshness that I had always associated with my mother's hands in the soil. We stood in it without speaking for a while. She used that child, my father said, not with anger anymore. It had moved past anger into something sadder and more tired. She did, I said, and it didn't work. 2 weeks later, the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit laid charges against Derek and Wanda for fraud over $5,000 and breach of trust. The forensic audit placed the total at just under $2 million. Reg's numbered company accounts remained frozen pending a parallel investigation. Curtis was charged separately in civil court and, several weeks after that, faced additional criminal exposure after security footage confirmed he had attempted to copy a confidential client database from a company server using credentials he'd kept active on a personal device. His lawyer described it as a misunderstanding. The judge was not moved. Gloria was not charged. There was not, in the end, enough evidence to pierce the corporate veil between her home address and the numbered company at the standard required for a criminal conviction. She kept the Brampton house. As far as I knew, she was still there. I thought about that sometimes. The strange, uneven edges of consequences. The fact that the most careful predator often escapes the specific teeth of the law while the more careless ones do not. But I thought about it less as time went on. What stayed with me were smaller things. Zoe sent me a text 6 weeks later, on a Saturday morning. She said she was okay. She said she was sorry for what had happened at the gate, for what she'd been asked to do. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. Not one thing. And that she had handled herself with more dignity than most adults, manage in situations far less unfair. She sent back a single small heart. I kept that text for a long time. My father and I drove out to Riverside Cemetery in Burlington on a Sunday in early July. My mother had been buried there for 11 years. We brought flowers from the garden, the peonies she had planted herself and always described as excessive, then spent entire afternoons arranging whenever they bloomed. We sat on the bench near her grave for a long time, without saying much of anything. Do you remember what she used to say? My father asked eventually. When I asked her why she spent so much time on things that only bloomed for 2 weeks. I did remember. She said 2 weeks of something real is worth more than a whole year of something that only looks right, I said. He nodded once. The wind moved through the trees above us, carrying the particular smell of that cemetery in summer. Warm stone, cut grass, the faint sweetness of the flower arrangements people had left at the other graves nearby. My mother's headstone was clean and clear. My father had seen to that, without fail, for 11 years. I had spent 7 years building something that only looked right. What was ahead would take time. Rebuilding trust inside the organization, renegotiating supplier contracts, restructuring procurement oversight, restoring honest relationships with the regional managers who had spent 3 years simply trying to keep their heads down while Gloria's people made noise. There would be difficult board meetings. There would be explanations that needed to be made with full transparency, because, as an organization that operates on concealment, cannot heal through more of the same. But the ground was solid. I knew how to read ground now in a way I hadn't before. On the drive back to Oakville, my father fell asleep somewhere around the QEW, which he always did on long drives, had done since I was small. I drove in the quiet and watched Lake Ontario through the guardrails. That specific blue of the lake, in July, when the light sits right, and the city is still far enough behind you that you can breathe without it. He woke when I pulled into his driveway. He looked out at the garden for a moment, still half asleep, with the expression that people wear when they come to in somewhere safe. "You'll be all right," he said, not a question. "I know," I said. And for the first time in 7 years, I meant it without working at it at all. I waited until he was inside, then sat alone in the car with the engine off and the windows down, in the warm early evening. One street over, a lawnmower was running. Somewhere down the block, children were doing whatever children do on July evenings in neighborhoods like this, the ordinary, unheroic, irreplaceable sound of a life going on. That sound, I realized, was what I had been fighting to get back to the whole time. Not victory. Not vindication. Just the quiet and ordinary right to be here, in this, present and unhallowed, with the engine off, and the windows down, and my father's light on in the kitchen. It was enough. I had finally learned, more than enough. To everyone listening to this, the part of this story that I think about most is not the boardroom, or the evidence files, or the moment the charges were laid. It is the moment Zoe put the cardboard sign on the ground. A 12-year-old girl, in an impossible situation that no child should ever have been placed in, chose her own dignity over the instructions she'd been given. She looked at what was being asked of her, understood what it meant, and said no. I hope I carry that as long as I carry anything. The most enduring thing a person can protect is their own clear sense of what is real. Lose your judgment in love, or in loyalty to the wrong people, and everything else follows. Recover it, even years later, even slowly, even at a cost, and you find yourself back where everything solid begins. Take good care of each other, and of yourselves.